Right now, across the internet, there's a particular type of content that's exploding in popularity. Dark backgrounds, ominous music, dramatic narration promising to reveal the truth about Jeffrey Epstein's files, the hidden networks of power, the names that were supposedly released but the mainstream media won't talk about. The comment sections fill with people convinced they're finally seeing behind the curtain, that they're among the awakened few who understand how power really works, while everyone else remains asleep. And here's what I need you to understand. In the next 15 minutes, this obsession with Epstein Files and secret networks, this conviction that you're uncovering hidden truth that powerful people don't want you to know, it isn't making you more informed or more powerful. It's making you less capable of understanding how power actually operates in the real world. It's training you to see conspiracy and hidden manipulation everywhere while missing the actual, documented, publicly visible systems of power and influence that shape your life every single day. I need to be very clear about something before we go further. Jeffrey Epstein was a real criminal who committed horrific crimes and whose connections to powerful people raise legitimate questions about accountability and justice. Those facts matter and deserve serious investigation and discussion. But what I'm talking about is different. I'm talking about the cottage industry of content that uses Epstein's crimes as a gateway drug into a worldview where everything is a conspiracy, where you're constantly searching for hidden files and secret lists, where you become so focused on imagined networks of control that you lose the ability to engage with actual, documented power structures. So before you go down another rabbit hole about supposedly suppressed information, before you convince yourself that obsessing over these files makes you strategically intelligent while everyone else is a sheep, I need to show you what this mindset actually does to your thinking, your relationships, and your ability to engage meaningfully with the world. The pattern trap. Confusing dots with connections. The Epstein file obsession follows a predictable pattern that I've seen destroy people's critical thinking abilities. It starts with legitimate outrage about documented crimes and failures of accountability. That's completely reasonable. But then it evolves into something different. You start seeing connections everywhere. Every powerful person becomes suspect. Every coincidence becomes evidence. Every lack of information becomes proof of cover-up. You're no longer evaluating evidence. You're connecting dots into whatever pattern confirms what you already believe. This is what psychologists call apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. And it's incredibly seductive because the human brain is designed to find patterns. We survived as a species by being really good at detecting patterns in our environment, but that same capacity, when unconstrained by rigorous evidence evaluation, leads us to see patterns that don't exist. Here's how this plays out with Epstein content. Someone creates a video listing every celebrity or politician who was ever photographed with Epstein or flew on his plane. The video presents this as if proximity equals guilt, as if being in the same social circles as a criminal makes you complicit in their crimes. Never mind that Epstein deliberately cultivated connections with powerful people, specifically to gain credibility and access. Never mind that many of these connections were superficial social or professional encounters. Never mind that actual evidence of wrongdoing requires more than just appearing in the same photograph. But the video doesn't encourage you to think critically about evidence standards or investigate what actual documented connections exist. It encourages you to assume guilt by association, to see everyone in Epstein's orbit as part of a coordinated conspiracy, to believe that the lack of public prosecution means cover-up rather than insufficient evidence. And once you adopt this framework, every piece of information gets filtered through it. Information that supports the conspiracy is evidence. Information that contradicts it is disinformation, or proof of how deep the conspiracy goes. The result is that you become completely unable to evaluate evidence objectively. You're not asking, what does the evidence actually show? You're asking, how does this fit into the pattern I've already decided exists? And that's not strategic intelligence. That's confirmation bias with a conspiracy theory attached to it. The hidden knowledge trap, mistaking obscurity for truth. One of the most seductive aspects of Epstein file content is how it makes you feel like you're accessing hidden knowledge that others don't have. The videos promise to reveal names that were released but ignored by mainstream media, documents that were suppressed, connections that they don't want you to know about. And every time you watch another video, every time you go deeper into this content, you feel like you're becoming more enlightened while everyone else remains ignorant. This feeling is incredibly addictive. It gives you a sense of superiority, a sense of being part of an awakened minority who can see truth that others can't or won't see. But here's what's actually happening. You're not becoming more informed. You're becoming more isolated in an information bubble that rewards speculation over evidence and conspiracy over documented fact. Let me give you a concrete example. The actual Epstein court documents that were unsealed in recent years are publicly available. You can read them. Journalists have reported on them extensively. The information isn't hidden. What these documents actually contain is more complex and less dramatic than the conspiracy content suggests. They include testimony, flight logs, and various legal filings. Some documents name people who were around Epstein. Some contradict previous claims. Some raise legitimate questions that deserve investigation, but none of them contain the smoking gun list of co-conspirators that the conspiracy content constantly promises is being suppressed. The conspiracy framework can't accept this reality because it's built on the premise that there's hidden truth being suppressed. So when the actual documents are publicly available and reported on by mainstream sources, the framework shifts. Now the claim becomes that the real information is still being hidden, that what was released is limited hangout, that the truly damaging material is being protected. The goalpost moves, but the fundamental claim remains. There's secret information that would blow everything open if only you could access it. This keeps you perpetually searching for hidden knowledge rather than engaging with available information. You spend hours watching videos about supposedly suppressed files rather than reading the actual court documents. You trust anonymous social media accounts claiming to have inside information rather than journalists who've spent years investigating these cases with rigorous evidence standards. You become convinced that obscurity equals authenticity, that the harder information is to verify, the more likely it is to be true. The powerlessness trap. How conspiracy thinking destroys agency. Here's the cruel irony of conspiracy thinking. It promises to make you powerful by revealing how power really works. It tells you that once you see the hidden networks and secret files, you'll understand the game and be able to operate strategically. But what it actually does is make you feel completely powerless. Think about what the Epstein conspiracy framework tells you about the world. It tells you that there are secret networks of powerful people coordinating in the shadows, that these networks control governments, media, financial systems, that they can suppress any information, eliminate any threat, manipulate any narrative, that the game is rigged at such a fundamental level that normal political or social engagement is pointless because the real decisions happen in hidden rooms among people whose names might not even be public. If you actually believe this, what can you do? You can't vote them out because elections are controlled. You can't expose them because media is compromised. You can't prosecute them because legal systems are captured. The only thing left is to endlessly discuss the conspiracy with other people who believe it, sharing more videos, finding more connections, feeling more outraged, but never actually doing anything because the conspiracy is too powerful and too hidden to fight. This is the opposite of empowerment. This is learned helplessness with a conspiracy theory attached to it. And it's particularly tragic because there are actual, documented power structures that you can engage with and influence. There are real political systems, real accountability mechanisms, real opportunities for change. But you can't engage with any of those if you've convinced yourself that everything is controlled by secret networks and hidden files. Let me give you an example of the difference. The fact that wealthy people have disproportionate influence on policy through campaign donations, lobbying, think tanks, and media ownership is not a conspiracy theory. It's documented political reality. You can look up campaign finance records. You can see who funds which politicians. You can track how lobbying influences legislation. You can observe media ownership concentration. This is all public information, and understanding it allows you to engage strategically, whether that's supporting campaign finance reform, voting for politicians who reject certain funding sources, or supporting independent media. But if you're convinced that the real power is in secret Epstein files and hidden networks that control everything, you don't engage with any of that documented reality. You just watch more conspiracy videos and feel more helpless and more outraged, while actual power structures operate completely unchallenged. The relationship trap. How conspiracy thinking destroys connection. One of the most devastating effects of deep conspiracy thinking is what it does to your relationships. When you become convinced that you see truth others can't or won't see, when you believe you're awakened while everyone else is asleep, it becomes almost impossible to maintain genuine connections with people who don't share your framework. This happens gradually. At first, you try to wake other people up. You share videos about the Epstein Files. You explain the connections you've discovered. You get frustrated when people don't immediately accept your interpretation. Some people engage with you initially, maybe watching a video or two, but when they remain skeptical or point out problems with the evidence, you start to see them as part of the problem. They're either too naive to see the truth, or they're deliberately refusing to wake up because it's easier to stay comfortable in ignorance. Over time, you start spending more time with people who share your conspiracy framework and less time with people who don't. This isn't because conspiracy believers are bad people or because you're making a conscious choice to isolate yourself. It's because maintaining relationships with people who don't share your fundamental framework for understanding reality becomes exhausting. Every conversation becomes a potential conflict. Every news event becomes an opportunity for disagreement. Every expression of different interpretation becomes evidence that they're still asleep. The conspiracy community becomes your primary social circle. These are the only people who really understand what's happening. These are the only people you can talk to without having to explain everything from the ground up. These are the only people who don't make you feel crazy for seeing what you see. But here's what you've actually done. You've isolated yourself in an echo chamber where every piece of speculation gets amplified, where skepticism is seen as betrayal, where asking for rigorous evidence is treated as defending the conspiracy. I've watched this pattern destroy families and friendships. Parents who can't talk to their adult children without bringing up conspiracy theories. Friends who can't spend time together without it turning into arguments about who's really in control. Marriages strained by one partner disappearing into conspiracy content while the other watches them become increasingly isolated and radicalized. The discernment trap. Losing the ability to evaluate evidence. Perhaps the most dangerous long-term effect of conspiracy thinking is how it destroys your capacity for critical evaluation of evidence. When you're deep in Epstein file content, you develop a framework where your standard of proof becomes completely inconsistent depending on whether information supports or contradicts your beliefs. Information that supports the conspiracy requires almost no verification. An anonymous social media post claiming to have inside knowledge about suppressed files? That's evidence. A video connecting dots between people who were in the same social circles? That's proof. A claim that certain names were released, but media won't report on them? Obviously true because media is compromised. You don't ask who made the claim, what their evidence is, whether it can be independently verified, whether there are alternative explanations. You just accept it because it fits the pattern you believe exists. But information that contradicts the conspiracy requires impossible standards of proof. Journalists who've investigated and found that certain claims are false, they're compromised, court documents that don't show what conspiracy theories claimed they'd show, they're redacted, or limited hangout. Experts who explain why certain connections don't mean what conspiracy content suggests. They're part of the cover-up. No amount of evidence can contradict the conspiracy, because the conspiracy framework has an explanation for why that evidence would be falsified or suppressed. This is the opposite of critical thinking. Critical thinking means you apply consistent evidence standards, regardless of whether information supports your preferred conclusion. It means you can change your mind when presented with better evidence. It means you distinguish between speculation and fact, between evidence and assumption, between documented reality and imagined connection. When you lose this capacity, you become unable to navigate reality effectively. You can't distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. You can't evaluate which information sources are reliable. You can't engage in productive problem solving because you're always filtering everything through the conspiracy framework. You become, ironically, exactly what the conspiracy content claims to protect you from. Someone who's easy to manipulate because you've lost the ability to think critically. The real path, engaging with actual power structures. So what's the alternative? Because there are real problems with accountability for powerful people. There are real questions about how Epstein operated for so long with apparent connections to influential individuals. There are real failures in systems that should protect vulnerable people. The question isn't whether to care about these issues. The question is whether you engage with them through evidence-based investigation and systemic analysis, or through conspiracy speculation. The alternative is developing genuine political literacy and engagement. That means understanding how power actually operates through documented, visible systems. Campaign finance, lobbying, media ownership, regulatory capture, wealth concentration. These aren't hidden conspiracies, they're publicly visible power structures that you can research, understand, and work to change. It means distinguishing between legitimate questions that deserve investigation and speculation that goes beyond available evidence. Yes, there are legitimate questions about who knew what about Epstein's crimes and when. Those questions deserve serious investigation with rigorous evidence standards. That's different from assuming everyone who ever met him is part of a coordinated criminal conspiracy. It means engaging with actual accountability mechanisms rather than just watching conspiracy videos. Supporting investigative journalism, following actual court cases, advocating for policy changes that would prevent similar situations, holding elected officials accountable through voting and civic engagement. This is less dramatic than believing you're uncovering hidden files, but it's infinitely more effective at creating actual change. The choice: strategic thinking versus conspiracy thinking. The Epstein file obsession presents itself as strategic intelligence, as seen through the illusions that trap ordinary people, as understanding how power really works. But what it actually represents is the opposite of strategic thinking. Strategic thinking requires accurate assessment of reality based on rigorous evidence evaluation. Conspiracy thinking replaces evidence with speculation and calls it enlightenment. Strategic thinking requires distinguishing between what you know, what you can reasonably infer, and what you're speculating about. Conspiracy thinking treats all three as equally valid as long as they support the conspiracy framework. Strategic thinking requires being able to change your conclusions when presented with better evidence. Conspiracy thinking treats changing your mind as weakness or betrayal. Strategic thinking empowers you to engage effectively with actual power structures and create real change. Conspiracy thinking makes you feel enlightened while rendering you politically impotent, socially isolated, and intellectually trapped in frameworks that prevent genuine understanding. You have a choice. You can continue down the rabbit hole of Epstein file content, connecting more dots, finding more suppressed information, feeling more awakened and more helpless. Or you can develop genuine political literacy, engage with documented power structures, maintain rigorous evidence standards, and work toward actual accountability and change. One path makes you feel strategically intelligent while making you actually less capable. The other requires harder work and less dramatic revelation, but leads to genuine understanding and real agency. Choose wisely. Conclusion. The promise of Epstein file content is that it will wake you up, make you powerful, help you see how the world really works. But what it actually delivers is isolation, helplessness, and destroyed critical thinking capacity dressed up as enlightenment. Because you can't build genuine understanding on speculation. You can't create real change by watching conspiracy videos. You can't develop actual power by convincing yourself that everything is controlled by hidden networks you can never effectively challenge. The people who create meaningful change in the world aren't the ones who spend their time connecting dots in conspiracy frameworks. They're the ones who understand actual power structures, engage with evidence rigorously, build coalitions strategically, and work towards specific, achievable goals. They're not looking for hidden files that will magically expose everything. They're doing the unglamorous work of research, organizing, advocacy, and systemic change. Real strategic intelligence means understanding how power operates through documented, visible systems and engaging with those systems effectively. It means distinguishing between legitimate questions and baseless speculation. It means maintaining relationships with people who see things differently and using those differences to sharpen your thinking rather than retreating into echo chambers. It means accepting that reality is complex and often less dramatic than conspiracy theories suggest, but far more actionable when you understand it clearly. The Epstein case raises real questions about accountability, about systems that failed to protect vulnerable people, about how wealth and connections can insulate people from consequences. Those questions deserve serious engagement with serious evidence standards. What they don't deserve is to be turned into a gateway drug for conspiracy thinking that destroys your ability to think critically, engage productively, and create actual change. The choice is yours.